Welcome to the next lesson of this Tarot Masterclass. I hope you've been enjoying what we've been doing so far, and I hope you've had time to reflect on each of the cards you've looked at. Remember, these lessons are really there to inspire you to think about the cards and the imagery on the cards and how you can start to make those connections for yourself about what they mean. It's also about you trying to find ways to look deeper into the occult, hidden, or mystical significance of the cards. Remember, this is not just about tarot reading, as most people think. I maintain the cards, first and foremost, are for your self development. And as we have explored in previous lessons, these cards were seen as a guide to initiation in some of the esoteric and occult schools in the Western tradition. So I hope you're getting it. I hope you're enjoying it. We need to look on. So it's welcome to the lesson. And this is the lesson on the Hierophant. A great word, that Hierophant. It actually means the religious pontiff or pope or spiritual leader. And there we see the Hierophant in the two versions of the card. On the left is the sort of the Pamela Coleman, no, it's not on the left, is the Frida Harris and Aleister Crowley version of the Hierophant. And on the right is the Pamela Coleman Smith and Arthur Waite image of the Hierophant. And as you can see by looking at them, there's some big differences. In fact, uh, almost immediately, I think you'll see that the Hierophant, the Crowley Hierophant, has far more complex ideas within it than the Hierophant by Pamela Coleman Smith. That doesn't make it any less important. It just makes shows us something very different, which we'll go into. So you've got to start by looking at the cards. I keep saying to you, put the booklets that you get with the cards aside until you've explored them yourself. And in some ways, each lesson, I hope you're getting to look at the card that we're on before I start talking about things and before you actually read the lessons in the book that are coming along in the written format. So it is really important to start getting your own vibe about these cards. And it's not just what I say, it's not just what the books say, it's not just what the various tarot texts say. It's about how you personally relate to these cards and how you relate to the story within them. Now, just a sidestep a moment, we've seen a number of cards that have kind of started to tell us a story. And if you think back to the Fool doing the journey, the magician bringing about will, and the high priestess sort of doing something with the will of the magician, and then bringing forth the empress and then the emperor, the two material cards in the deck, there is a story evolving here, which we will spend time by going into and we will link the story to some key ideas. I've already mentioned, I think, that we're not going to be doing 78 of these lessons, one for each of the cards. In fact, as you saw in the last lesson, two cards are placed together for good reason. As we move through the deck, we will find that some major cards will be placed together for good reason. But where we're going to end up with this is after having looked at the major cards, that is the 22 tarot trumps, you will see how the minor cards fall into place. And you will see how the story across the tarot major cards is reflected in each of the minor cards. And so, if you're hanging on and thinking, gosh, this lesson's going to go on forever, ever, and ever, and ever, we're not. We should be wrapping this up about the same time as we finish looking at the major arcana. And some of those lessons will be doubled up. So please enjoy the journey, but try not to imagine that this journey is going to go on forever and ever and ever, because 78 months is a long time and it won't be that. But I'm hoping that by the end of it, you will actually understand where you can take your learning for further forward. So, without further ado, let's look at the Hierophant. There is the image of the Hierophant in the Pamela Coleman Smith and Arthur Waite deck. And as you look at it, you may get certain ideas about it. One of the things that comes across to me, or came across to me very, very early when looking at this deck, was the religious nature of it, the Christianized nature of it, and we'll explore that a little bit. So, hopefully, you've had a chance to look at it and see what you can see, and we'll go through and point a few more things out that you might find interesting. So, for example, what are the main colours in this deck, here in this card? We see the reds of the robe and the yellow golds of the crown and the staff. We see two grey pillars either side, the grey throne that the Hierophant is sitting on. We've seen those pillars before. You will think back and say, "Oh yeah, I remember we've seen those before." Um, there's a brown or russet chest or carpet on the floor. Now, so I kind of see that as a chest, but that's me because it's on a raised dais. But there's that on the floor is sitting on. The priests have got sort of yellow collars or surplices on, and those robes are patterned with flowers. Very interesting. So they're red flowers, yellow. So those are the main colours. And if you squint at it just a little bit, you'll get a better idea of some of those colours and how they stand out. So again, hopefully your journal's been at hand and you're actually making some notes. So what's the story here? Well, to me, you may see something different. I see a religious figure bestowing blessings on the priests in front of him. I'm assuming it's him, although there's quite a feminine face there, which is also interesting. And this Hierophant is sitting between two pillars that we did see in the High Priestess card. Um, there is the characters holding a triple cross, which is associated with the Trinity in Christian terms. But of course, there are other trinities within esoteric teachings that may well be um, worth considering and thinking about. The Hierophant has their left hand open and pointing upwards as if to receive divine messages and then bestow them with the wand or the crucifix or the tribard staff that they are holding. And the more I look at this card, the more feminine I think this card appears to be, the face particularly. The crown, of course, is the papal crown. And yeah, interestingly, um, this is the first card in the tarot deck where more than one person is depicted in the traditional decks, anyway. Um, so we've moved from the Empress and the Emperor, which were physical, as individual cards, and here we see a card with a group of people. Not particularly relevant to this card because they're bald headed priests in front of the Hierophant. But as we'll see later, maybe it's the Empress and the Emperor and Empress in front of the Hierophant. Just maybe. Okay. Uh, we do know that the papal crown is linked to divine authority. There are two pillars I mentioned, the scepter with the three arms, the Trinity, as I mentioned. At the feet, in the chest, there's cross keys. And the cross keys are very kind of symbolic of papal authority. If you've seen your Dan Brown novels and film, Angels and Demons, you will realize that the cross keys are very significant, but also it's a symbolic mention, really, of the keys to the gates of heaven that Peter gave in his epistles to the papal authorities. The flowers on the robes of the priests, they're roses and lilies. you look carefully, what you initially thought to be red flowers on the Pope, on the priest on the right, are actually white flowers, and on the left, red flowers. And those are always to do passion and purity. And passion and purity are some of the themes that we need to develop as individuals in order to spiritually develop. We need to be passionate about our course, and we need to be pure in our thinking and our thoughts. And of course, I mentioned before, the priest represents some kind of community, and it's a community of people. So now you will maybe have enough rough ideas to start drawing meaning from these symbolic references. Remember, when you look at these cards, it's not what is obvious at first, it's what you can read into them that is important. So, who is the Hierophant? Is in fact a female pope? Maybe you'd like to think about any history to do with a female pope. Maybe this card is quite subversive in the sense that it's a challenge to male dominance. Maybe this card is about passing through the pope, through the material realms, in order to gain initiation to what's beyond those pillars, in the same way that initiation was offered by the high priestess. There are connections. Place the two cards together. Place the high priestess and the hierophant together to see what you can see and to see what you can get from those symbols. Yeah. Try to understand the mystical references in them. The repetition of the three crosses on the front of the robe of the hierophant is another representation of Trinity. Now, Trinity, we know, is the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, but what does that really mean? I think Christian mysticism has a lot of going for it for us to look into, because what we are taught in schools as the simple catechism, as the simple idea of the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, is a watered down version of what some of the Gnostics and what some of the early Christians were actually preaching. There are great differences between what we see as being in the biblical texts and what we see as being in the text that inspired the editions that we know came from Constantine and afterwards. So have a think, have a reflection on this. Now, having said that, we'll come on to the Hierophant in the Thoth Tarot. I I've had a love-hate relationship with this card on lots of levels because it seems to be quite a dark card. And behind the Hierophant in this one, you actually see there is a window opening out to a new landscape beyond it. So, whereas in the Pamela Coleman Smith deck, the priest was the Hierophant was the guardian of two pillars. Here, the Hierophant stands in front of a window to a possible future or possible uh, new vision. This card, there is a lot going on, and Lady Frida Harris really considered Crowley's teachings in this card, and that's why I kind of love this card because there is so much in it, and we're only going to scratch the surface. Hopefully, you'll go a bit deeper when you start looking into it. So again, let's start with what are the main colours. Well, the main colours look, it's a very brown, earthy, russety card, isn't it? You know, obviously the white window with something behind it. Looks like a pale green hill of some description, which incidentally, the pale green hill seems to flow on from uh, the conical hat that the Hierophant is wearing. Um, we also see a pentagram, very obviously an orange yellow pentagram. But if you look closely, there's not just a pentagram, there's an inverted pentagram and a hexagram. Really interesting. And behind one of the rays of the hexagram or the inverted pentagram, there's another landscape. And there are silver grey icons in the corners. They stand out. They're really looking at you. They're challenging you. And behind, we see a bull and elephant. The Hierophant is holding a triple ringed wand, uh, and there's a kind of connection here to the magician in that, in the left hand is holding the wand upwards, and the right hand is pointing downwards. Probably more about that later on in the course. And standing in front is possibly Isis. So I've kind of ran on a bit there because this is quite an exciting card. So what's the story? Well, it's a spiritual leader sitting on an earthly throne, embodies wealth of spiritual knowledge and understanding. That's why the pentagram and the inverted pentagram and the hexagram are there. He's an earthly character with clear spiritual understanding and is connected to the four elements which make up the earth and also embodies the spiritual. How do we know that? The four characters around the edge of the Hierophant are representations of a number of things, but in particular, representations of the four elements earth, air, fire, and water, with spiritual bits being caught in the middle. So what do we see? We see a figure of man in a pentagram, which you've got. We see a pentagram pointing upwards, which you can see in yellow. We see a pentagram pointing downwards, which you can see in kind of gold. A hexagram contains the whole lot. There's a wand or a staff. There's a man, lion, bull, and eagle. Those are four elements. There's a bull and an elephant as well. And there are 9 nails above his head. And those 9 nails, well, you may want to believe this or you may not want to believe this, but that circular window, if you look carefully, is actually got a snake wrapped around it. And the snake is eating its tail. It's the Urubus, which is a symbol of infinity. 9 nails, well, you can read up about that because it's, I know I've put it in the text that goes with this. To help you out, we've got a better picture of it here. And you can see that in red, you've got the pentagram, inside of which is a child. And because Crowley and Frida Harris were inspired by Egyptian mythology, that child is often suggested to be Horus, which would make the woman there Osiris, and the fact that the crown that he is wearing now looks like it's got two parts to it, which is an Egyptian crown, which is Osiris. So you have Egyptian mythology built right into that. So you have a pentagram with the point upwards, which is in red there. Let's stop for a moment and remember what the pentagram is. The pentagram is the four elements plus spirit. In the pentagram we've drawn there, spirit is pointing upwards. And so the inner drive of this Hierophant is to actually attain spiritual awareness because the inner pentagram is pointing upwards. The second pentagram is inverted. And this is the one you see on all those Hammer horror movies where they've actually got it the sign of the devil. No, it's not. Think about this. The big point is spirit. Okay. So what you have here is material concerns over spiritual concerns. Okay. In the red pentagram, it's spiritual concerns over material concerns. And those are really important distinctions to make. Any of you that are linked or know much about Wicca, especially the Alexandrian branch of Wicca, will know that the first degree initiation, the symbol is the pentagram, which is the acquisition of spirit over matter, spiritual awareness over the material plane. The second degree initiation is the sign of the inverted pentagram, which is becoming aware of the importance of the material world over spirit. That's the balance. And the challenge we have is, and I've been to a number of events where people are, I don't know, so into their spiritual selves, they forget that they are living material lives. And it's the integration of those that's important. The hexagram, by the way, which is in blue there, actually is a six-pointed star and is the integration of as above, so below. There's the chalice and the sphere, and there's so many interesting reference points to that. But here is the idea: if this is a card of initiation, of total commitment to a spiritual path, then you have the journey to give birth to a new self by starting with the understanding spirit and matter in both um, the sort of dominances, and then the integration of both, as above, so below. Um, you have Isis, or in some books and some reference points, they talk about her as Crowley's Scarlet Woman. I won't dwell on that too much unless you want to go and look it up, but I suspect that the easiest thing to focus on here is the fact that there's an Egyptian mythology going on. So Isis, Osiris, and Horus, really important. Now, the other thing I think is really interesting is when you first look at what we can now see is Isis's head, when you squint a little bit, that looks like a fertile landscape behind her, which I think is interesting. And there is a cup being held by her, which actually is ready to receive the spiritual wisdom of the inverted pentagram. Mm. Okay. There's a bull in the background curled around the robes, the flowing robes, and that bull is Taurus. It's a representation of the star sign Taurus. And so is the elephant, by the way. They're earthly bound creatures. Which brings us on to the four corner creatures. Well, um, Crowley wrote a lot about the secret of the Sphinx. And the secret of the Sphinx was the idea of to know, to dare, to will, and to keep silent. Um, so technically, if you're a magus or an adept or a however far you up, the more spiritual you are, the less you speak, and the more you know, and the more you bring will to bear, and the more you take daring what you do, and you don't talk about it too much. That's why the idea of comes from in most Wiccan circles. If you cast a spell and you talk about the spell too much, it diminishes the spell because you are talking about it. So there's a lesson there about these four powers. So in the top left-hand corner, we have an eagle or a dragon, which is water, and that is to dare. On the left, we have a man, air, which is no. Bottom, sorry, on the right, that is. On the bottom right, we have a lion, which is fire and will. And on the bottom left, we have bull, earth, keeping silent, stoic, solid. Yeah, these are important ideas. And to say, I think the lessons of the Sphinx, if you want to look them up by Crowley, are worth looking up. Now, what about the circles and the clover leaf window that is being in front of? Okay, without getting too much into Crowley here, Crowley spoke of aeons or passages of time when certain things were more important to people. And we've been through the third aeon, which is why the third circles are being held. And we're opening a doorway to the fourth aeon, which is the window behind the Hierophant. But the only way you can get to this new age was to become initiated through the path of understanding and the fact that you had to dare to be initiated, you had to know what it meant to be initiated, you have to bring your will to the magical traditions and then keep silent about it, which I think is really fascinating. So there's a lot going on in this card, and it's worthy of your spending time thinking about. The last thing I'll say about this is that unlike the Pamela Coleman Smith card, which was very Christianized and had people and priests in front of him, this card doesn't have other people there. It has a representation of a goddess there. I'm not sure whether we're meant to take that she's a material presence or not, simply because of the way that she's drawn. But you could take her as a material presence, and therefore we have this beginning idea of bringing about balance between the yin and the yang, if you like. But more about that later. So when you look at these cards, like always, you have to find your meaning. You start with your initial reactions. You move on to looking at the symbolic references that grab you. Now, you're not going to get all of these in one sitting. I, when I started looking at these cards over 50 years ago, I took each of the elements that I was interested in first and wrote about them in my journal, and then kept building on that. And that's the use of these cards. They're not about the Hierophant means wisdom and knowledge. No, it doesn't. It's an invitation to attain wisdom and knowledge. Yeah. So when people simply reduce cards to readings, i.e., take a card, oh, it's the Hierophant, therefore you need some spiritual guidance or need to gain some wisdom, which is a valid interpretation, but that's such a superficial thing. It's the tip of the iceberg. This card is instructing us and actually giving us hints as to how we come about that spiritual guidance and knowledge, where we have to be grounded. We have to be solid like the bull. We have to understand the wisdom of the Sphinx, the knowledge of the Sphinx. Know, dare, will, keep silent. We have to understand the inner and outer workings of spirit over matter and matter over spirit, and the concept of as above, so below. Any one of those ideas can take you a long time to get your head around, and I mean truly get your head around. It is very easy to simply say, oh, yeah, as above, so below. It's one of the Kabbalion Hermetic principles. Yeah, but what does it mean? What does it really mean? And if that is true, as above, so below, what implications do we have from that? So reflect on your cards. You can use them for divination. You can use them for self-reflections. I keep saying they are an initiatory tool, but more importantly, they're an encyclopedia of esoteric wisdom, particularly the Thoth cards. Now I'm beginning to show a bias now, aren't I? Yeah. The Thoth cards have far more juicy symbolism in than a lot of the Rider Smith cards do. Okay, so next month we move on to card six, and this is the card The Lovers, me lover. So I hope that you'll join me for that, and I hope you're finding these interesting and valuable and powerful. And so until next month, which is December, by the way, if you're following the course as I'm producing it, I'll see you then.